right, we're streaming live, everyone.
I don't see Rick. Do we know if the mayor's going to be late, or Tracy, do you know? Do you hear him around you somewhere?
Hold on, let me check. It looks like he should be joining us, so.
All right, I've got a hard stop at about 1:45, so I'd like to get going in a second if we can. We'll give him a minute. All right, let's get going. And if he joins us, great. If not, that's okay too. All right, so I'd like to call to order the May 24th. I'd like to call to order the May 24th, 2021 meeting of the City of Charleston Traffic and Transportation Committee. Thank everyone for being here, and ask if Councilmember Brady will lead us in an invocation or a moment of silence, please.
Absolutely. And if everyone would just bow their heads, we'll do a moment of silence. All right, thank you.
Thank you. First order of business is approval of the minutes from May 11th, 2021. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, additions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Next, Ms. McKee is traffic and transportation right-of-way permit fees discussion.
Great.
Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Share my screen here. Have a few slides to walk you through. First, want to thank Keith Benjamin and his team over at TNT, specifically Michael Mathis, Thomas Teasdale, and Lee Cleckley, as well as Andrew Jones over in BFRC. This team worked really hard to get this proposal in front of y'all today. Lots of meetings, a lot of hard work. So thanks to that team for everything they've done to get us here. How do we get here? So I think you all probably know that right-of-way permits might involve both TNT as well as public service. TNT has jurisdiction over what happens in the street. Public service has jurisdiction over what happens on the sidewalk. Pre-COVID, we had started to meet to talk about how we can streamline the process for our customers. So with that group, we really did kind of determine really at the highest level where we wanted to go with this. And so obviously the first piece is how do we streamline the process, create, so they have to get less applications, right? Less departments to visit. So how do we really make it easier on the applicants or the customers? So, but the other piece of this was how do we also increase safety and also minimize disruption to both residents and businesses? And so, we thought the best way to do that was through increasing collaboration, optimizing the length of time for right-of-way permits. So how do we make sure that permits are only obtained for the amount of time that they're absolutely needed for? And this third piece I think is really important. How do we proactively inspect right-of-way permit activity? So those are the things that we looked at. And this is really kind of the holistic approach. And what I'm going to propose to you today is taking this first little bite out of the big elephant, if you will. So there's a much bigger process at large that we hope to have finalized in January of 2022, which is kind of having one umbrella under which all right-of-way permits will be in EnerGov. So it'll be kind of a one-stop shop, if you will, at least on the EnerGov side for anyone needing a permit in the right-of-way. But again, this is just step one, tiny little bite out of this big elephant that we're working on. So as we started to dig into the process, we really had to make a paradigm shift. The way that T&T permits are currently issued today is really by the type of work that's being conducted. And so as we started to dig into it, we started to realize that what was really more important was about where the work was happening. That really kind of triggered how much time these permits were needing from a staff and resources perspective. And well, I'll get into this, but I did want to kind of bring that up from the get-go. So how do we, what was the process that we took? So we started with process mapping. We looked at all the permit types that T&T issue, talked about who got involved in the process. We also, in this process, we also identified the complexities. So what triggers a particular permit to cause more time, more people to review it? So just more capacity, more resources to get them out the door. And then we also did some time tracking. So T&T did a great job on tracking their time that they needed to do to issue permits. And from all of that, we developed this new fee schedule. First, I want to talk about what their current fee structure is for those of you that may not be completely familiar with it. So right now, T&T issues street blocking permits. There's no fee associated with those. Dumpster permits, which are $10 a day. Meter bag permits, which are $10 a day. And I'll point out at this point in time, if a meter space is occupied for an entire day or the entire active time of a meter, that actually is $18 a day. So, but we only charge $10 a day currently. Construction parking, there's no fee for that. And then a moving permit, which is, there's no fee for that as well. So we took a look at the permits that they issued in 2019. 2020, as we all know, was a weird year, so we didn't feel like we should use the 2019 data, the 2020 data to base anything off of. So you can see the total permits that were issued from T&T here, a little over 2,000. And then the revenue that was generated from those permits was around 380,000. So it's a lot of permits being issued by the T&T department. They're very, very busy. So how do we get to, what is our new structure or the proposed structure that we're bringing forth to you all today? We kind of broke it into kind of three major groups, if you will. So looking at a full street closure, a partial street closure, and things that are happening in a parking space, whether they're metered or non-metered. And so you can see under the full street closure and the partial street closure, we've broken it also down by major and minor roads. This is not a new delineation that has to be made. These delineations are already made in our city's GIS system as well as in South Carolina DOT's data. So it's already something that exists. And quite simply, major roads are interstate, state and county highways, and some of the primary collectors. So that work's already there, the data's already there. It's not something that needs to be recreated. So that's kind of the hierarchy of the new structure that we're proposing today. So how do we get into calculating the fees associated with this new structure? So first of all, there's a review fee. All these permits require review by at least one individual, some of them many individuals before they get approved. So we identified the positions that needed to be part of the review. BFRC, like I said, Andrew was part of our team. He derived the hourly position rates for us. And then we also did the time tracking. So then we used all that information to come up with the review fees. Metered space fees, I mentioned there's a gap, that $8 gap between what we collect for a meter fee versus what that would actually collect if it was a position that was taken all day. So we adjusted to capture for that loss of revenue. And then the new piece of this are inspection fees. We felt like this was really important. So how do we go about calculating inspection fees? So we did a GIS drive time analysis. We took the 2019 permits. pulled them into GIS, and based on that drive time analysis, we were able to identify the average travel distance, average drive time, and actually use that to calculate, along with the inspector fee, come up with the inspection fees that would be appropriate. So here is the proposed fee structure. I've kind of outlined this, a little bit of this in pieces already, but this kind of puts it all together. So here you see kind of these major buckets. And then we didn't want to leave out kind of miscellaneous obstructions, just to make sure that this was kind of making sure that we keep the things that we already have, and knowing that if you have a dumpster pod or a moving, you still are, you still have to get a permit and pay in this system. So, so then we have the different kind of subcategories, and then the associated review fees. The review fees, it's a one-time fee. So when they come in, they pay that one-time review fee for just for staff to review. So the next piece is the inspection fee. So if you need a permit for 10 days for a major street that's a full street closure, you'll pay $350. Okay, so that'll cover the 10 days. So, and why the major is more expensive, basically doubled than everything else, we thought it was really important for a major street to be inspected twice a day if it's a full street closure. So definitely a safety thing there. And then the other ones are simply once a day inspection at $17.50 per day per inspection. And obviously, if metered spaces are impacted, that it's an additional $18 per space per day that would be part of that fee. It's a lot to take in. So one of the another thing I should mention here is one thing that we did talk about in our discussions about this structure was that that we were a little concerned about the staff resources and capacity to inspect all of their permits. So maybe as a stopgap recommendation, we would move forward with implementing inspection fees for those that happen on a major street. We felt like those were probably the most important to get inspected. And then we would implement those and come back to you all maybe 3 to 6 months once we have some data and really kind of understand the staffing and resources that would be needed to make sure that we can actually perform all those inspections. Just a thought, just a recommendation for consideration. Oh, and major streets do account for approximately 30% of the permits that are issued. So we felt like that was a fairly good balance. So, you know, the question we kept asking ourselves is, okay, so what would we have brought in 2019 if this new fee structure had been in place? This is a lot like trying to compare apples to oranges, right? Because we've kind of shifted how we're approaching issuing permits and how they would function. So take this with a grain of salt. So that almost 5 million that you see at the end is a really exciting number, but there's a number of things that we should recognize about that. Number one is that most of the permits issued in TNT are kind of generally for 180 days. So we hope that with these inspection fees, we'll see folks get a little tighter with how many days they actually need a permit for, which I think will be really helpful for the TNT staff and be less disruptive to the community as well. We did take a pretty conservative approach to applying the fees as well. And that obviously if we only implement inspection fees for major roads, that would have an impact on this overall inspection fee number that you're seeing here. So this was an attempt to do it, but please know this was a very, very much apples to oranges comparison, but we wanted to try to present all this information to you. So next steps, if this gets approved, legal team is kind of ready to have the right legal documentation, the ordinances all ready to go, I think, in the June meeting. So once it gets final approval, if approved, we would then make configuration changes in EnerGov. Right now, we're on the cusp of doing an upgrade, so we would wait till that upgrade is completed. And what that would entail is simply making a permit fee adjustment, but also enabling the inspections for tracking. So once we have all that in place, we can start to talk about some performance management element. So identifying performance targets. I think a big thing here is how we manage expectations of the public. Because right now, I think there's folks that come into T&T and really expect to get their permit right on the spot, same day. Obviously, if you're doing a full street closure on a major road, that's something that really needs some consideration and thought and lots of eyes on. So we want to make sure that we do that right with data once we have it. And obviously, we'll work to develop some real-time and transparent reporting. And then, like I said, kind of the big enchilada of this whole thing is how do we put the public service piece and the T&T piece under one umbrella in EnerGov so that it's seamless for the end user. So if they're doing work in the right of way, they can go anywhere to initiate their permit, know what the expectation is for getting that actual permit in hand. And again, our target for that is January of 2022. So with that, I'm happy to try to answer any questions anyone might have.
Okay, anybody have any questions? I see Mr. Benjamin has his hand up. Yes, sir.
Well, first, I want to thank this committee and the mayor for giving us permission to delve into this. If you remember, almost a year ago, you all kind of gave us the green light to start digging into this and come back to you with a proposal. And so this is that first start. Just for clarity, per instructions from legal, today we wanted to present to you what our thought process was and the work that staff have looked at. And then in the June meeting, if you all are good to go, bring forward a first reading of an ordinance to make those specific changes. I think the big piece here, and let me make sure I get on the record too, Tracy held us together like glue. So I'm really grateful for her bringing us together. But the accountability piece, I think, is important for us as staff, especially for these developments that are happening all over the city, and how we hold them accountable to do right by not just us as city staff, but our constituents who are traversing our streets and making sure that they're safe as possible. Another big part of this is capacity. So you all had already budgeted for us to hire an additional inspector. Thankfully to BFRC, they allowed us to move forward with that position. And so once we get our new traffic operations manager on board, who's starting on June 1st, we're excited about that. We'll move full speed ahead on getting that additional inspector on board as well. So we know this is a capacity piece, but there's an accountability opportunity here as well that quite frankly, has not existed in the ways that it should. And so I think that that's a big part of why we wanted to bring this forward to you all and get this going.
Okay, thanks. Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
So accountability is a good word to use in talking about this proposal. And yet there's accountability on the part of our staff. I want to thank the staff for their hard and thoughtful. You can tell they put a lot of thinking behind these things when they put them together. But I remember a couple of years ago, I got a number of complaints about a development going in over on Cumberland Street. And I went over there and they had the whole street blocked off. And so I called Keith to find out about their situation. Well, as it turned out, their permit was only for one lane and they had just taken over the whole street basically. And, you know, there was no accountability really, not nearly the level it needed to be. And so of course, one of my next few questions was, well, at least how much money are we getting out of these folks for closing down our street? They were like, Mayor, we don't charge anything for this. And I was like, I can't believe it. So it's taken us a little while to get this to you, but it's really needed in our city to help manage what's with the construction of dumpsters and everything that goes on in the right of way. I think this is a great start. A lot of thought has gone into it, and I want to thank Tracy and Keith and Robbie and the others who public service folks were involved a good bit too for the work put into this. Thank you.
Any questions? Council Member Del Chapo, then Council Member Jackson.
I was just curious how we arrived at these fees. Like, where did you come up with those numbers? I get the one of going to $18 for the metered spaces, but was curious about the others.
Yeah, so we started off kind of with the process mapping and looked at all the different kinds of permits that they issued and talked about, all the different scenarios, who gets involved. So we looked at, what positions actually get involved and estimated the time that they spend reviewing and meeting about certain permit types. Then we actually took that and did time tracking. So TNT actually kept track of their hours associated with every permit that they were issuing. And so we kind of made adjustments based on the time tracking, and BFRC provided us with the hourly rates for all the positions that were involved in the permit reviews.
So if I may add, the bottom line is we're not allowed by state law to charge any more than our costs in reviewing and implementing a service, this being one. And so they made sure, and Amy always makes a special point to make sure we adhere to that we don't charge more than our costs.
Councilmember Jackson.
Well, thanks. That answers my question about the 50 cents. I thought, well, maybe, pennies on the dollar, it's sort of mind catching and you do pay something that's got a 50 cents attached to it. But now I understand it's a real number. A calculated number based on what the mayor just told us. So I think this is absolutely necessary and an improvement, and hopefully a morale booster to at least our employees who pour themselves out to do all these things. I really think we need the inspection part of this process, because you're right. We have no control over how long, where, to what extent these uses of our right of way, really impact our citizens. So I'm totally ready to vote on an ordinance in June. Thanks.
Any other questions? Councilmember Brady, do you have any questions?
No, and I agree with what Councilmember Jackson said as well. Just in that, I think especially for our citizens, knowing we are a hustling and bustling city and having our roads blocked, that there's at least some recompense for the taxpayers on that. And so, I'm ready to move it forward as well.
So just real quick, Tracy. Yes, Mayor, go ahead.
And I think it adds some incentive for the developer and the construction company to get in, get their business done, and get on out, So I just thought I'd add that.
No question about that. So Tracy was kind enough to share this with me in advance, and I agree with all the comments. I think this is much needed. I do think, and you probably heard at the beginning of Tracy's presentation, she commented this was just a small part of what might be a bigger project, which include coordinating with engineering on the sidewalks as well, which we have huge sidewalk blockages. And the other thing, and this is just one of my sort of pet peeves, is keeping track of those steel plates that are all over the place, all over the city. We found one the other day at the corner of East Bay and Broad that had been there for a year, unidentified. We didn't even know whose it was. We had to go the city had to go lift it up to look at the work underneath to figure out who to go yell at. So just coordinating all of this and monetizing, what's going on in our streets as we lose access to them, I think is a really important step. I don't think, unless someone tells me differently, we need a motion on this, just a general direction to bring this back to us in an ordinance form as soon as you're comfortable with it, so we can vote on it and send it on to council. Am I right about that?
Yes, sir. We wanted to make sure we didn't want to miss the ball in presenting to you all. Actually, as Tracy was presenting, said this was the right move to make. Put it in front of you all now, get your questions, and then we'll work with legal for the June meeting to get a first reading in front of you all and full council to give additional direction or changes.
Can I just ask the last question? Is there some coordination currently going on the next step, which is figuring out how we're going to integrate the sidewalks into all this?
Yes, definitely. I'm already working with the public service team, and we are working on that. So hopefully we'll be back to you guys in a few months at least with step 2. So
well, that would go through Public Works, right? So
yes, that would go through Public Works. Yes, right. Yes. So
that's a whole different issue.
But probably before January, we'll come back to both committees kind of to bring it all together. So
okay. Well, we're leaving money on the table here, and we might as well go and put it out there, right? Okay, I don't think we need a motion unless there's any objection from this committee. I think the direction to Ms. McKee and Mr. Benjamin and team is go forward and bring it back as soon as you're comfortable. And then we'll vote on it and pass it through to council if it passes this committee. Yes?
Will do.
Okay. Unless there's any other questions, we'll get on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Parking Dispatch and County 911 Center MOA for information purposes only. Legal team is what it tells me here. And I see we've got at least 3 of you out there. So, all right, team, what you got?
Team legal. Good
I
thing
see,
we're
I
not,
see.
good thing
Miss
we're not
Ardina.
charging by the hour, right?
That's what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I know. Well, all right. So this is a fairly straightforward MOA. Again, this is here for information only. You're going to see it on the Ways and Means Committee agenda tomorrow night. But basically, this is an agreement between the Charleston County Consolidated 911 Dispatch Center and the city to share some computer support services that'll help our parking enforcement. As to the details of that, I'll defer to Keith. But basically, the agreement is until December of 2022, at which point it can be renewed if we decide. The costs are set forward in the agreement. The city expense for 2021 will be $8,764, and for 2022 it'll be $8,762, and this is going to go towards maintenance and update as needed. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the agreement, although it's very straightforward. And I think Keith is here to answer any questions about the details of the exchange of services.
Let me give a little bit of background. Thank you, Susan, and Matt is here as well. So as you all may remember, our parking dispatch actually sat with the county. It was in their county dispatch office, and they gave us notification that service was not something that they were going to continue to provide and expected the city to take on. And thankfully, we were able to scramble together to make that happen. And also be able to house all of our parking, at least at T&T parking, all in the same place. And so we actually now have parking dispatch and parking enforcement offices all in the same place with all the necessary technology, information, and all that. So IT, BFRC, and facilities is extremely helpful in getting that together in really a short time frame. So really grateful for that. And so a number of the costs that are iterated there, and I won't put more into Matt's mouth, but will already be adjusted and handled. So it's not necessarily a request for new dollars, as some have already been addressed to get that office up and running. And so it's just us coming to county and saying, hey, we are in agreements with this MOA and getting our signature on it. But did want to bring it to you all as we, through the budgetary process and otherwise, found out about us having to absorb the dispatch responsibilities, and just wanted to make sure you all were abreast on it before it came to Ways and Means.
Great, thank you. I see Mr. Froelich has chimed in here, making a rare appearance at TNT. Would you like to get something on the record to be preserved in perpetuity?
No, I don't have anything. I was just here in case anybody had any questions about the financial part of the deal. But like as Keith and Susan both said, it's pretty straightforward.
All right. Any member of the committee have any questions for Ms. Ardina, Mr. Benjamin, Mr. Froelich, or anybody else who's chimed in here? This is for information purposes only, so no action needed from this committee. Okay, I don't see any questions. So thank you all. We'll look for this at Ways and Means when it comes forward. Great. All right, thank you. Next on our agenda and last is our director's update, Mr. Benjamin.
Hey, everybody, and bear with me. Have a couple of things that need to make sure you all are aware of, and some coordination we're doing with some of our other agencies. I'm not in Charleston at the moment. I'm in Columbia. As you know, in February, the Secretary Hall put out a directive around complete streets. And then that directive iterated that a council would be formed to begin to figure out what that implementation strategy will be looking, and how that'll apply to municipalities and MPOs and district offices. And so that meeting's at 2:00. And so I'll be there to listen in and be a part of that council for what that looks like for us here in Charleston in the the state as well. Speaking of the state, we did have a really good meeting last week regarding the road safety audits. If you remember, we have 4 of the top 10 corridors in our city with regards to pedestrian and bike safety. I have made a request of the state DOT that a coordination meeting happen between them, Council of Governments, county, and us at the city to walk through what the scope of those 4 corridors would look like and what would be included. What we've been told by the SCDOT is that the vast majority of the recommendations in the road safety audit will be included in their scope, minus a few things here and there or areas where we need to find coordination. And so they're moving forward with getting the full scope done with the engineering firm that they're working with. They let us know that after that scope is completed, 120 days from there, there'll be a notice to proceed. And then they're looking for a letting date in late 2022. And so just wanted to give you all that update that looking at 2022 for beginning to work on some of these projects and otherwise, but just wanted to make sure you're aware because there's small things happening on those corridors, but there's some important pieces on there as well, especially when you look at St. Philip Street and you look at King Street, both north and south of Calhoun, and when you look at Calhoun in terms of its integration with LCRT. So more on that soon, but just wanted to let you know that that train is moving. The mayor had sent a letter to the secretary requesting to expedite the process of those RSAs, and just wanted to let you all know that progress is being made in that regard. The other thing I wanted to bring to you all's attention in light of our conversations around complete streets and the needs of coordination to get transportation done. As you all know, thankfully, because of good relationships, we get a chance to see some of the list of pavings that either the county are going to be doing or SCDOT will be doing in the future and getting a chance to give input. And otherwise, we had gotten a heads up that the entirety of Rutledge Ave was being looked at for paving at first in fiscal year 2022. We were corrected and let know that it's being looked at for fiscal year 2023. So a couple years off, but knowing that that was the case and knowing that there's a whole bunch of different things that have happened along Rutledge and could happen along Rutledge, everything from our citywide transportation plan to county's US 17 corridor study to various different requests from stakeholders, we thought it was important to get on the record with the state DOT and say, hey, we need you as the owner of the right-of-way to help lead safety study and progress of implementation of some of those plans. We sent that letter in February of this year and got a response back in May that did acknowledge that there does need to be coordination, did acknowledge that an appropriate form of that coordination would be through a road safety audit, but they did let us know that the traffic safety office currently doesn't have funding, but then turned to the city and said, hey, if you want to make something happen, move it forward. And so I bring that to your attention because there's those opportunities that sit out there for major coordination. It would be a crying shame for us to have a newly paved street that doesn't implement the safety and requests that we've heard from the community for literally years, sometimes some of them decades. And what that coordination looks like, where our say so, your say so as electeds comes into play in those, I think is extremely crucial. Partnership is key, but I think leadership is key as well. And so we just want to make sure that we're not missing these opportunities and there's much coordination as possible. So I just bring that up as an example of where there's an opportunity for coordination. Yes, the city can step up and do particular pieces to move the needle, but we all have to do those pieces together. And so hopefully that's something that, again, they're looking at it for fiscal year 2023. So that's a little bit of a ways off, but what exactly does that coordination look like and how do we get progress on that so we don't have basically a newly paved street with exactly what was there before. The other update wanted to give you all was with regards to Harborview School. As you know, there's been one or two constituents that have mentioned this issue around the school for some time with regards to Frampton and the reopening. Public Service took a look at it and decided not to permit a hearing. However, our team, along with legal, along with public service, been working to with SCDOT, with the school, and otherwise to coordinate as need be. The latest request that had come out regarding on the streets, very streets where there is existing traffic control, to manage what comes in and out of that school, to place signs that basically would make that illegal. We actually coordinated with CCSD, had a meeting with the executive director of transportation. They simultaneously had some meetings with their heads of security, and they will be submitting a letter to the city that I'll have in you all's inboxes hopefully tomorrow morning, just reiterating the city's position regarding that signage and otherwise, and why it's important for them to maintain the traffic control plan that they have in accordance with what the community, the general community in that neighborhood has asked for. So I'll make sure to have that in your inbox on tomorrow morning. I spoke with CCSD representatives this morning about that, just so you're aware of the progress and the fact that staff have been staying on top of that issue. And last thing, wanted to just make sure you all are aware of, staff told me today, I know it was a question in our last meeting regarding Lockwood and Calhoun. We did get a letter from SCDOT stating that they were comfortable with the left turn phase analyst report that we did for that intersection. And we should be getting their go ahead within the next 30 days. That's a small project. That's a project that our staff can actually get done without having to farm out. And so we look forward to getting on top of that in July, and give us about 60 to 90 days to get that project done from July.
Great. All right. Any questions for Mr. Benjamin? From any member of the committee? I'm looking around, I'm looking around, I'm looking around. I see one hand. All right. One hand wins. Councilmember Jackson.
Thanks. It was a great list of things that, you know, are in play, Keith. So I did have a question of the Complete Streets Council that Secretary Hall is putting together. Is it all just employees in the transportation world, or are they taking, you know, some citizens, Charleston Moves representative, for example, or is it all just inside?
So I haven't got a full briefing on who all will be there. If I look right at the invitation, I saw various different municipal and agency representatives. I saw our MPO is represented there. I believe I saw a representative from Charleston Moves on there as well. So yeah, definitely saw a number of different folk were represented. Looked like the Deputy Secretary and Primary Deputy Secretary Colvin, and then Deputy Secretary of Planning, Brent, both will be in attendance as well. So looking forward to hearing what their process is and what that looks like, and what implementation means, not just for, you know, the large scale projects, but for those everyday asks that you all come to us with, right? You know, it's easy to talk about big projects, multi-million-dollar projects, but that intersection safety project, you know, that crossing, that, you know, those are the type of projects that we all hear about every day. And that's to me where the big benefit of this directive comes into play.
Okay, great. I just have one other topic, Mr. Chairman, and it jumps off from Keith's report about complete streets and, you know, all the movement in that direction. I think we might be at a place on James Island, and I see Councilmember Appel on here, that we would, well, first of all, appreciate having sort of a complete streets explanation of what's happening on Maybank corridor. I don't know if it needs to go all the way down to John's. Councilmember Brady can certainly jump in on that, but I do feel like there's bits and pieces that we've been, you know, given an update, especially the like the crosswalks and the things that are, you know, going forward under the city management or inspiration. But I think it would really help us. I know that you said that until we have an agreement among like all the jurisdictions that have some sort of presence on Maybank, on James Island, with that Riverland Drive intersection, that we really can't make progress until we have some sort of coordinated agreement. And maybe it would be great if we could start that at this committee level, if that would work for you and Chairman Seekings. I do think that there's pent up demand by the citizens, no matter where they live on James Island, to see that Maybank does have some more holistic, well-coordinated game plan going for public safety, bike ped, you know, successes, all of that.
It seems to me, isn't there a working intergovernmental working group between the county, the city, and the town of James Island that does some looking at this? That may be a good place for Mr. Benjamin to start to brief everybody before it comes back to this committee, because without that coordination, I'm not sure there's much we can do on the bigger scale. So maybe that's a good place to start, Keith.
Can I just say one word? I think that could be a good solution, but my experience of the Intergovernmental Council is it sort of needs to have a, sort of a leading contributor to the thinking. We sit there on that council often and just sort of, nobody wants to take the lead. So that's why I'm hoping that maybe we could have a coordinated, set of thinking from City TNT committee, and then take that to the Intergovernmental Council as the jump start that I think, the chicken and the egg. We have county, we've got state, we've got town of James Island. So we need to have some inspiration that, has a plan to promote and get agreement for.
Well, if I might suggest, get with Mr. Benjamin. I mean, as soon as you get to the intergovernmental group and you start talking about safety on a major thoroughfare, that'll probably get their attention. And if we've got Keith on the lead on this, I think that would probably get some attention. Then we can bring it back here.
Right.
Any other questions for Mr. Benjamin or anything else? Just really quickly, Keith, your comments about the letter back and forward between the DOT and here about Rutledge. And I know Robbie has been involved in this, but over the course of years, we've looked at Rutledge and the coupling of Rutledge and Ashley for a number of different options, including but not limited to two-waying each one of them. Seems to me if we know that 2023 is barreling towards us, we might want to dust off whatever we've done already on Rutledge, particularly between Septima Clark and Calhoun Street, which is where I think we've had the most intense look, and see what we've got sort of in our pocket for options, and at least consider them before they go and lay a whole bunch of tarmac down and do the same really crappy thing they've already done with Rutledge, because it needs a lot of work.
Yeah, I think the reason why I had submitted the letter I did is we need the owner of the public right of way to say what is and isn't possible and then move forward. So
Right.
for us to expend funds on possibilities that might be turned down, right? I have a little bit of discomfort with that, right? To Councilmember Jackson's point about what's happening in the Maybank corridor, got to be fair and say, we've had a road safety study that we pushed the state DOT to do that they led on. City has requested multiple projects along there. Some of them have been funded, one in particular at 1.2 million. So, even what we just did on King Street, the benefit of that is we had the state DOT leading to bring all the right people together and say, hey, here's what we are comfortable with and not comfortable with on our street. And knowing that we have all these different, I don't want to say it like there's 95 of them, it's some specific ones, citywide transportation plan, US 17 corridor study, and then some really primary requests from stakeholders in the neighborhoods adjacent to those areas and the medical district that have said, hey, these are the things we want. Can we have one place where that's codified together so that we understand what's permitted and not, and then go from there? I think the concern I have is that similar to what we just went through with the Upper King Street walkthrough, that there was a number of things that were said yes to, but then it fell back on the city to say, hey, you find hundreds of thousands of dollars to restudy and improve again. I think we need to move towards what's implementation. And that's the thing that I feel that we'll get in this rigmarole of study, and then 2023 come around and we missed the boat. And so I think if there's a way to coordinate together between us, the state DOT, the county, even the COG, and say, hey, here's what Rutledge needs to look like, I think that would be extremely helpful. So I welcome any and all voices kind of raising that banner up a little bit, so we don't miss the opportunity.
Well, it seems to me as long as the mayor gives you the go ahead, one of the places to start is with Tim Henderson and Josh Johnson at the DOT to see what is and isn't possible on Rutledge before we get too far down the road, right? What they'll allow and what they won't. But it needs some work.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions, comments for Mr. Benjamin or anybody else on the Traffic and Transportation Committee? If not, unless there's anything else for greater good, I'm going to call this meeting adjourned. Oh, on a recording stopped there. All right, see you all tomorrow. Looks like in person.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, y'all.
Welcome
Thanks.
to James
Thank you all.
Island tomorrow.